Okay, if you're watching the recording, you can jump forward to the 6-minute mark. I'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Okay. So it is 11:10. I am seeing that I have a relatively strong connection. There might be a little bit of tech issues happening in here, but I think everything's operating well overall. I'm going to leave my camera on. You guys don't have to turn your cameras on. I actually specifically bought this chair for this purpose at the beginning of the pandemic. And I decided, well, if I'm going to sit in the nice chair, I might as well turn my camera on. I'll make up a code word. We really, honestly, at this point in the term don't need code words anymore, but you all just love your code words. So today's code word is mug. The first thing I looked at, my coffee mug. Um, So I'm not going to share for a second, only because I'm going to be looking at our grade books to kind of talk about some things that I want to kind of briefly address. And could someone just put that you can hear me in the chat just to alleviate kind of my personal paranoia? So I am looking at what we have left in this class in terms of grades, and we do have a slight schedule disconnect in terms of where the quizzes were supposed to be and where the quizzes actually are. Remember, we mentioned that I didn't want you to, or you didn't have to, it's the best practice for you not to take the quiz until after we've covered the material. Some of you have, that's okay. As I see it right now, a lot of people haven't finished quiz 7, and a lot of people haven't finished quiz 8. If I remember, let's look at the syllabus right now while I'm talking about that. And I'm going to close out that window so we'll actually, I'm not going to start sharing. Yeah, you guys can hear me. Great, thank you. I'm not getting the audio cues for Zoom, which is kind of weird. Oh well. So now sharing my screen, and let's look at the syllabus. I have a cold too. It's not just my daughter. So today today's November 29th. We're slated to be talking about lecture 10, new communities. So according to the according to the reading schedule, we're definitely past the quiz chapter 8. So if you've been waiting to take quiz 7, take that. And then when we're done with lecture 9.1, we absolutely will be in chapter 10 territory. And then by the beginning of, oh shit, okay, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, we're well past quiz 8. We are starting lecture 9.1. Because I'm not with you all and not trying to answer questions, once I start talking, I'll probably start going pretty rapidly. So we'll probably cover a fair amount of material today. We are looking at week 16. We're scheduled for sharing our final plot projects and maybe a little bit of the corporation and review for the final. I'm restructuring that entirely right now with my audio words. What we're going to do is today I'm starting 9.1. I'll probably continue 9.1 into Thursday, almost guaranteed. And then next week, starting December 1st, next week starting December 6th, we're not going to be sharing our final projects. That's not graded anyway, it doesn't matter. We are going to be doing lecture 10.1, and then I will wrap up lecture 10.1 on Thursday the 8th, being absolutely sure to give you all at least 30 minutes of class time for us to talk collectively about what will be on the final exam. And in a couple, if you have any questions, just maybe make a note of that right now. Let's jump over into that final paper, because remember, your final paper is due Sunday. We're sticking with that deadline. Your final paper is going to be significantly longer than your other papers, but you are absolutely allowed to reuse materials from previous papers on this final paper. Your job on this one is to put it together and make the paper itself flow, right? It's a culmination of a semester project. So the things you need to put together are, you need to make a new introduction. You need to, and I'm just working down the numbered bullets. You need to tell me about the climate change problem. You need to tell me about your proposed DIY project. You need to tell me about what tech could be useful in your project. How could you expand your project once you got started on the small scale? How would your project help your community? And then write a conclusion, and that would be a new component. And then for the bibliography, you just add on the bibliography that you did in the previous assignments. And then you take out the annotations, please. The annotations muck up the works, and I'll take off formatting points if you leave the annotations. So take that stuff out, leave the actual references on the bibliography. Obviously, the whole way through, I've been talking about this. Make sure you're using in-text citations and all that junk. I'm going, a tip I put for this one, you'll notice that the word count for this paper is less than the total word count of the other papers combined. It's permissible to use parts of other papers in the assignment, but I do expect you to edit. So don't just copy and paste all the words from the previous assignment into this one. I do expect you to turn it into a real paper. Don't turn in anything other than doc files, RTF files, or PDF files. Please, no Google Docs. They do not work. Or Pages format, which is the Apple format. Total paper word count is going to be 2,000 to 2,500 words. Standard margins, all that junk. Each page has to have at least two in-text citations and a bibliography of at least 5 references. And that is your term paper. And honestly, most of that should be together by now. So if you are on the ball, it's not that big of a burden. And those are due Sunday at 11:59. So I kind of passed by it. We're not going to be watching The Corporation in class, because that is kind of a buffer thing I put into the syllabus just in case we were ahead of time. Unfortunately, we're not ahead of time, but we are doing just fine. Are there any broad questions before I move forward with talking at you? Go take a drink of water. Okay, hearing none, I'm gonna start with the lecture. And I hear my daughter walking around upstairs, don't know what she's doing. If you see a slight purple tinge to my camera, I do have a hydroponic pepper plant growing in the corner. Your camera's doing just fine, but sometimes the light reaches over here in a way that looks weird. So let me get the slideshow going. So in this lecture, this is lecture 9.1, Social Change, Terrorism, and activism. This is another one of the lectures that over the semesters of like developing and honing this course, this is one of the original lectures from the original material that I think is pretty important for understanding this topic, because fundamentally the whole course is about social change. And then also it's good to talk about, well, what is activism? What do we mean by activism? What happens that can be categorized as activism? When does activism sometimes carry over to be terrorism? What exactly is terrorism? Is all terrorism the same? The overwhelming answer to that is absolutely not. Not all terrorism is the same. That is something that many of you are not old enough to really remember the conversations we had surrounding 9/11 and what that word terrorism means. Our society became very confused in that regard for a while there. But I'll talk about all that later in the lecture. So first, we're going to talk about some broad theories of social change in talking about environmental justice. Then I broadly structure the lecture to talk about first how we educate people, then we agitate people, then we organize people, and then we will address terrorism directly. In terms of content warnings, we are going to be talking about terrorism, and we're also going to be talking about accusations of terrorism, and we also will address school shooters briefly. So let's talk about some theories of social change. Just a broad reminder, I bring this up in almost every human conversation I have. We tend to use the word theory incorrectly in our day-to-day English language. A hypothesis is an idea that can be tested. A theory is a statement of scientific fact. Thus, a theory is more than just some dumb idea you had. It's a idea. Your dumb idea you had might be a hypothesis, but unless you're talking about how gravity works, how evolution via natural selection works, what happens surrounding the Big Bang, what happens to an ice cube when it melts into water, you're not talking about theory, you're talking about a hypothesis. Sociologists define social change then. Again, we're doing our broad definitions before we get into other things. Social change is the transformation of a culture over time. And social change may be deliberate and intended, and usually that deliberate and intended social change occurs with an organization. However, social change may also be unplanned and unintentional. Going on with all of that, then some social changes are definitely more controversial than other social changes. Those social changes that are done on purpose then are the ones that tend to be more controversial, right? There has been a substantial social movement in the United States for the last 20 years or so to strike down the Supreme Court ruling of Roe v. Wade and make abortion in certain circumstances illegal. That has been an intensely controversial thing in our country, and that was a deliberate social change. Other things that are not as controversial, well, I'll give you an easier example. Things that aren't as controversial in I believe it was about 2009 or so, when all of us in our society, we went from sneezing into our hands to sneezing into our elbows, right? It was really kind of remarkable. You were all mostly little kids at that time, but to see adults shift how they're sneezing all at once, that wasn't controversial. We were just pointed out to us adults. Oh shit, we've been sneezing wrong for our whole lives. That's a non-controversial social change. So there are several ways that social change can occur. Sorry. A major physical event can be a unintentional way of social change. So something like a pandemic, COVID has absolutely been something that has changed our society in a major way. Natural disasters such as hurricanes or earthquakes, those also create tremendous social change. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in 2005, the week before Hurricane Katrina, there were 4 million people living in the city of New Orleans, and or maybe 2 million, still millions of people. And then after Hurricane Katrina, even to this day in 2022, the current population of um, New Orleans is somewhere in the zone of 400,000. So it went from being a major, what could classify as a megalopolis, to a kind of small city now. That is a major social change caused by a major physical event. Another unintentional form of social change was the demographic aging of the baby boom generation. As we discussed in lecture 6.1, this has been an unintentional social change. There were a lot of babies born all at once. That was not something that was done on purpose. It was a matter of historical factors coming together to basically make a whole bunch of babies all at once. But as those babies have moved through their life course, became middle-aged, and now becoming older people, their sheer demographic numbers have had an impact on the whole of society. So discoveries and innovations, these can also cause social change. They tend not to be that controversial. Things like the discovery of silicon microchips, that really changed almost everything in our society. The advent of the internet, in its proto form in the early 1980s, moving into the 90s, 2000s, and today, since we have developed the internet, every decade we are seeing greater and greater and greater advancements that has caused more and more and more social change, including the fact that you don't have to miss class just because I can't get to school because I have to watch my kid. And it also makes it easier for me to call off or to actually take care of my kids too. That's a positive social change. And then pharmaceuticals. As we develop new drugs, we can treat illnesses that were previously thought to be untreatable. In the late 1980s, if you got HIV and then AIDS, that was considered basically a death sentence, right? Today in 2022, it is now more or less considered to be a treatable disease. You do not want to come down with HIV, but it is not something that's going to steal your whole life from you. That's a major social change. And then we have oppressed groups seeking justice. That is intentional social change. Groups like Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ plus rights movement, the Me Too movement, all of those movements have been intentionally seeking out social change to change oppressive elements within society. And that stuff is the stuff that tends to be controversial. When we talk about social change, we often talk about collective behavior because collective behavior is, I'll take that back. Social change is a type of collective behavior, and participating in a social movement organization involves a lot of different forms of collective behavior. Collective behavior is defined as any behavior that groups of people engage in. Collective behavior may or may not be coordinated. It might be that we all say, okay, on Thursday, everyone's wearing a red shirt to show our solidarity with these striking workers, right? That is coordinated. Or it might be that red is just super popular because it's fashionable, right? That's uncoordinated. It may or may not occur at the same time and place. And participation in social movements, as I mentioned, are part of collective behavior. Those may or may not, both of those, the way they come together define different forms of social change itself. Emergent norm theory then. Emergent norm theory states, and this is a micro level theory of social change, that individual members of a crowd make their own decisions about behavior. And thus, Norms are created through others' acceptance or rejections of their social setting happening around them. So in effect, if you go to a protest, if you go to a rally, whatever, that can be measured, or it could be a meeting, right? We're talking about small scale factors. Emergent norm theory contends that by participating in the social setting, by simply being there, we are all of us deciding from moment to moment to moment what kind of social setting is this going to be. Let me give a extended example so you can understand it a little bit better. I have seen this play out many times at protests I have been at in person. So let's say we are at a let's call it an anti-war rally for whatever, right? And there are impassioned speakers talking, they're getting real riled up. And then over on the side, about 200 feet away from us, there are a bunch of heavily armed cops in riot gear, right? Which poses a kind of physical implied threat to us. Like, hey, we have these big batons, but really they're massive wooden baseball bats, and we are prepared to whatever use them. And just for the sake of argument, let's say that somebody gets it into their head, I don't like what those cops represent. I'm going to pick up this rock and throw it at them. The rock goes, it hits the shield of one of those riot cops, hits the ground, doesn't hurt anyone, nothing happens. But in that moment, the hundreds of people that witness that are making collective decisions. Each person is making an individual decision, and then how each person subconsciously votes effectively will decide what's going to happen next. Is the crowd going to say, you know what, I like that, and then all pick up rocks and start throwing them at the cops, right? And then that would cause the cops to start making their own collective decisions, not really because they're actually a little bit more structured, but maybe that would instigate the cops to come in and start attacking the protesters, right? So that is an example of people who are there present deciding this is going to be a violent protest. Or maybe in the moment of picking up and throwing the rock, the people surrounding the person that threw the rock, they go, this is not the kind of protest we came here for. We came here for a peaceful protest, right? So people say, no, police, come get him. Look at him right there. He's the one that threw the rock. We do not approve of this behavior. Or we confront the individual and we say, listen, this is not a violent protest. You have to leave, right? And if collectively the crowd does that, then that is also the norm emerging and flowering out of the social setting. And then it takes a layer deeper. So let's say in the violent situation, then when the cops start to move in, when the people start throwing more and more rocks, those people that don't want to be involved in a violent protest, because it wouldn't be 100% of the protesters that would think that was a good idea, those people that are nonviolent, they then self-select and get out of there. And in getting out of there, they then concentrate the violence within the people who remain, because those people who remain are more dedicated to a street fight with the cops effectively. Or the other situation where they say the people who maybe are wanting to throw some rocks, they see how other people are reacting in the crowd that are yelling at the guy that initially threw the rock, and they are saying, listen, I'm not here because I like cops. I'm leaving because I wanted this to be a violent protest. And then they self-select out, and then the crowd becomes more peaceful, right? That is an example of emergent norm theory. It is the collective interactions of the people, total people present in the social setting, determining the collective actions of the whole. And it's yet another example within sociology of the fact that we all think that our individual actions and behaviors are completely under our control. The reality of the matter is that we are absolutely prone to our social setting. Yeah, okay, that's enough with that. I could really talk about that for hours. Another phenomena is culture lag. Culture lag refers to the time between changes in material culture or technology and the resulting changes in the broader culture's relevant norms, values, meanings, and laws. A example of this could be bad COVID mask wearing, even among good intending people. It took us, even in the height of the pandemic, a while for people to actually start wearing their masks right? We all saw a whole lot of nose breathers that were pretending that that was okay, right? And the lesson there being that change, even change that is critical for public safety, even change that people go along with, takes a little bit of time. And that time is culture lag. Another pretty good example of culture lag relating to technology would be if you're on Facebook or any social media really has this, the people that just in this moment in time, it's often older people that share things on social media that think somehow that isn't absolutely public, right? So they just start talking about, you know, their underwear or how sick they are or really private information, not fully understanding that everybody's going to see that. That is also an example of culture lag. Culture lag often is tied in with technology. There's usually a gap there. And sorry, this section in the lecture is a little bit all over the place. These are just all these ideas are connected though by being grounded in social theory. These are concepts of social change theory. So a social dilemma then is tied with most social problems. A social dilemma occurs when behavior is rational for an individual, but it can lead to collective disaster when practiced by many people. Traffic is really an amazing example of a social dilemma. If there were no traffic on the road, I could get to OSU in maybe 2 minutes, tops from my house. I could get to class if there was nobody else on the road and in the class in about 2 minutes, right? But that's not how it works, right? There are thousands of people in my way. So because of those thousands of people, it changes the way I interact with my social environment. And sometimes that can get out of control when everyone's trying to go all at once, and that creates problems there. Now, talking about social dilemmas, there are multiple types of social dilemmas. Specifically to get you thinking about the concept of social dilemmas, we have two specific dilemmas: the tragedy of the commons dilemma and the public goods dilemma. Both of these are pretty closely related to the ideas surrounding environmental justice. Whoops, wrong button. The tragedy of the commons dilemma was first identified by Garrett Hardin in 1968. This is I honestly, when I was doing the research for this lecture, when I originally put this lecture together, I thought the concept of the tragedy of the commons dilemma was actually much older. To tell me that it was first identified in 1968 is kind of surprising to me. Garrett Hardin, who was an economist, I want to point that out. Why is that relevant? We'll talk about it on the next slide. Hardin argued that this dilemma occurs when many individuals overexploit a public resource for personal gain, and thus they deplete or degrade that resource, right? So the argument and the basis that Hardin is making is, and you have to look at the underpinning assumptions that he has of human nature, right? That he's assuming us humans are inherently greedy, that we inherently move in our and act in our own self-interests. As such, if it makes sense for me to throw my garbage in the river, then I'm going to throw my garbage in the river. The tragedy of the commons is really good for explaining why people pollute for selfish reasons, effectively. The idea of the tragedy of the commons comes from a comparison to British agricultural practices during the medieval era. The commons were a patch of grass in the middle of a town where, if you have a bunch of sheep or something, you bring your sheep into town as the shepherd, and you could leave your sheep in the commons while you go into the store to pick up some cheese or something. And then you go out and you but you just leave your sheep there a little bit, right? And then you leave, right? And that's what the commons were for. Hardin was arguing, though, then, because we are rugged individualists, there will certainly be people who will go in and take their sheep and have their sheep just eat all of the grass. Well, because, right? Because they see a resource that they can exploit. So he is making the argument that basically collective property is doomed to disintegrate because people will always be greedy. And this is, if you're one of the people that took my Social 101 class, this is more detail in the tragedy of the commons than I usually go into in my Social 101. What I want to point out about this relating to environmental justice is that this is a very capitalist oriented, very Eurocentric concept, that the commons will inherently get degraded. And I blame that largely on the fact that Hardin was a capitalist oriented economist. I alluded to then, if a farmer left their animals on the commons for too long and too frequently, it would ruin it for everyone, right? But the tragedy of the commons is making the assumption that everybody is an extreme individualist as opposed to an extreme communitarian, which we discussed in our previous lecture, right? The tragedy of the commons is inevitable if everybody is an extreme individualist. If people are communitarians, the commons can work. As I alluded to, the tragedy of the commons dilemma blames collective ownership for the tragedy and assumes that all people in society will be inherently individualistic, even though that type of individualism is a modern problem. The commons, it should be pointed out, did exist prior to the modern era, right? And didn't we point out, while we were talking about it in previous lectures, that the idea of extreme individualism isn't something that we really had until the beginning of the 1800s? And isn't it interesting that that is when commonses kind of went away, right? So really, I find the term tragedy of the commons to be misleading. I think it is more the tragedy of individualism, right? The commons disintegrate, the commons degrade because extreme individualists are acting in their self-interest. It is not a problem with the nature of communal property. It is a problem with the behavior of extreme individualists. Additionally, then, the tragedy of the commons dilemma assumes that no one will notice that overgrazing is occurring until it's too late, right? And it assumes that communities don't talk to each other, that we don't notice that Fred is going in and letting his goats eat all the food in the commons, and what the hell, Fred, we're just going to let him do that, right? And if you've ever lived in a small community, you know that people in small communities know exactly what their neighbors are doing, and people in communities are complex. So thus this concept of the tragedy of the commons, and don't you love how my voice is flying apart? This concept of the tragedy of the commons is a error and flaw in our society. It is not inherently a error and flaw in all societies. So this concern is a matter of contemporocentrism, right? This is a problem with our society. It's not a problem with all societies. And as I've been alluding to in these recent lectures, we could build it so that future societies don't have these errors as much if we work toward being more communitarian. Another concept, the public goods dilemma. The public goods dilemma occurs when individuals must contribute to a collective resource, even though they may not directly benefit from that resource. A good example of this is insurance. Insurance does not work unless most people who buy a car do not cash in on their insurance, right? If everybody in the city got into a car accident all at once, the insurance company would collapse immediately, right? Because insurance only works if very few people cash in. Additionally, something like taxes. Taxes only really work for most things if everybody pays them, and those benefits may not necessarily be obvious that we reap from the taxes that we pay. But many of those things, such as in the city of Columbus, garbage, roads, bulk pickup, all of those city schools, all of those things are beneficial to us in the long run, even if it's not immediately obvious to, I guess, selfish people. A little bit more about taxes. Historically, Americans, this is something that's kind of built into our cultural DNA. We are incredibly hesitant to raise taxes. And this does tend to be extra true if the benefits are not abundantly obvious to us. A good example of a failure of the public goods dilemma is that if we would tax gasoline, it would have the double benefit of discouraging excess driving and collecting money that could be used to help the environment, right? And you can explain that to the American public until you are blue in the face, and you would never pass that measure in any kind of democratic way, because the majority of the population, given our current society, just wouldn't go along with it. And we tend to perceive that, and this data is from May 2011. So the gas prices are entirely different, but these rates are about the same. They haven't changed a whole lot. We perceive that our gas prices are so high in the United States. The reality is that compared to our community of international neighbors, we pay very little in gas, and most other countries that are similar to us tax their gas heavily. We don't do that, and we could actually make some pretty good environmental change if we did do that. But again, that's the kind of that, much like regulating, heavily regulating guns, it's just not really going to happen. I mean, and the guns, I mean, assault rifle bans may happen, but we're not talking about anything probably more than that. So now we're going to move into the portion of the lecture when we talk about these concepts of educate, agitate, organize. And let me look at my clock. I need a clock down here. 11:50, perfectly on schedule. So there is a mantra in the labor movement, among union organizers and in other social movements. It is educate, agitate, organize. That is something that if you say that to a union organizer, they know exactly what you're talking about. That is the basic model for making a social movement work, at least as an organizer goes. Educate. First, you have to teach potential members or potential activists what they need to know to understand what you're talking about, right? Educate. Agitate. You have to appeal to what matters to that person or group. So you tell them what they need to know to understand the words that you're saying. Then you tell them about what matters to them. And if, from a social movement perspective, getting them a little bit angry about the thing, that can help you often. And then organize. You tell them what they can do to help with the cause, right? Give them a job to do. Give them an action item to go forward to help the cause. And then also to help you measure how dedicated is that person to the cause. That is, if you're interested in going to any kind of community engagement, any kind of social work or union organizing, that is something that's a key piece of information. What am I getting at here? Okay, so in terms of educate, right? So this is how our lecture is structured from here on. It is important to know a little bit about our collective global history. There was a declaration put out by UNESCO, which is the UN environmental, part of the UN environmental program, called the Tbilisi Declaration. Its main call to action stated that environmental education is a learning process that increases people's knowledge and awareness about the environment and associated challenges, develops the necessary skills and expertise to address the challenges, and fosters attitudes, motivations, and commitments to make informed decisions and take responsible action. That was laid out by the United Nations in the city of Tbilisi, then within the Soviet Union in 1978. That's a whole world ago. It was recognized that in order to get people to be environmentally active, you need to show them what the problems are, right? And that really is the basic foundation for modern environmental education. If you want to look, really dig into it, the full text of the declaration can be found at that hyperlink. So, and we're going back to why is environmental justice inherently interdisciplinary? Why? Because there are actually very few quote unquote experts on the whole field of environmental justice. A sociologist, a climatologist, a geologist, we all know very different things. So in order to trust somebody, you have to know more than just your given subject. What's another way to state that? It is very difficult if you are trying to win an argument to actually educate someone, right? There is a degree of trust within education that is a major issue we are having in our society right now. We have historically low rates of trust. So because of that, a lot of people do not trust education structures anymore. And that leads to all kinds of things, including misinformation that could cause events like the January 6th riots, where the people in Congress their lives were at risk. It's also difficult for academics who have been taught to only trust their academic research, right? So what's another way of saying that? It's tough to be interdisciplinary as an academic. We have been put in our silos, and one of the things moving forward that needs to be done in terms of climate justice is for everybody to share their knowledge. I, as a social scientist, need to share my knowledge with climatologists so that climatologists can try to figure out what will humans actually do to stop the problem, right? Not just what should they do mechanically, but what socially has to happen in that whole process. What am I getting at with this illustration? Basically what I'm getting at with this illustration, I don't remember why I put that there. Who knows? So, and this is what I was alluding to that. I got a little ahead of myself on the previous slide. Conveying knowledge is a social relation, right? If you want to get people to trust you, if you want to have a conversation with somebody, you can't just start talking facts at them, right? You can't really argue with them. You need to get them to trust that you know what you're talking about. Education is trust. You must trust that your teacher knows more than you do, right? If you think that your teacher is an idiot, you will not learn, probably, right? And this is either because, and we trust our teachers either because we met our teachers ahead of time, right? So if you're taking somebody a class that you took before, you think, well, I like the way they teach, or I think they know some things, so I'm going to take that class again. Or you inherently trust the institution or your community. So you are paying a lot of money to OSU, or you will be paying a lot of money to OSU after you graduate. You buy into the idea that college is an important thing, that education is an important thing, and then therefore you inherently trust me on that first day. Now, the trust builds as the semester goes on. Hopefully you trust me more, that I vaguely know what I'm talking about here toward the end of the semester, as opposed to where we were at the beginning of the semester. And you also have to trust your personal experience. So we have to trust our personal relationships and our previous experience. All of this is to say that it's more than just, is the person I'm learning from telling me things that are true? It doesn't matter if those things are true if you don't trust them, right? So this was made so abundantly clear to me when I had a conversation with a friend of mine who I really haven't talked to in a long time because of one of these COVID arguments, right? Relating to vaccines. He said something along the lines of, well, yeah, but do you really trust what pharmaceutical companies are saying? And I said, no, I don't understand the process, but I trust science, right? I trust the scientific process because I know scientists, right? And I have relationships with scientists, and I have social relationships with scientists. And I know that the vast majority of scientists are doing it because they are pursuing truth, right? Because most scientists don't get rich, right? Most scientists are not doing it for their self-benefit. They are doing it because there's something about learning that really jazzes them, if you will. But all of this is to emphasize that you can't just yell facts at people to get them to come along with you. You also have to build trust. Additionally, to cultivate knowledge, we have to also cultivate the ignorable, which is a very real issue in our modern social world. Part of living in the modern world is dealing with disinformation, and we can't consume all information. It is physically, intellectually, temporally impossible. But we can think critically about our information sources. Here, there's a very cool, let me take a drink. There's a very cool program called NewsGuard. It is a cookie that you can add on to your browser. I am a member of the American Federation of Teachers, and as such, all members of AFT get NewsGuard for free. But if you're interested, you can also purchase a subscription to NewsGuard. And what it does, and it is the coolest thing, notice these are 2 screenshots of websites. This is just like, I'm just sharing with you a really cool thing to show you, can I trust the source? Can I not trust this source? So I installed this on my Firefox browser, and see this little green dot right here? This tells me that BBC.com, you know, the BBC News Service out of Great Britain, that green check means this is a very trustworthy website. And then Breitbart, the infamous far right-wing, highly skewed source, NewsGuard tells me that Breitbart is highly untrustworthy. And so I can use this on my browser. And if I go to a website, I'm a little skeptical about it, I can easily look at that little dot in the corner and say, well, NewsGuard says this is very trustworthy, so I believe them, or it's not, it's very untrustworthy, so I should be wary of it. And I've actually played with this program quite a bit. It is really, it's not partisan, and I really like that, actually. Breitbart, NewsGuard does give Fox News, you know, pretty right wing, MSNBC, pretty left wing. They give them both greens, right? As in, they have a history of at least reporting news mostly factually, right? There is politics involved in this stuff, but these people are, at least they're not actively lying, right? And then the red check, and I've also checked highly flawed things that I know to be sources that absolutely do lie on purpose, and they do come up with those red exclamation points. And then, like, if you would say go to my personal website, there's not a check or there's not a green or a red. That's because there's not enough information about that. Well, what does that say to me as someone that's trying to gather factual information? Well, if NewsGuard, which is a pretty big organization, doesn't have information on this individual source, then maybe it's a little less than credible. They might not be known liars, but maybe I need to confirm the source. This is just one example of a really good way to educate yourself on what are the things that you don't necessarily have to pay attention to. Very, very interesting kind of thing. So one example of the application of, let me take a drink of water. One example of the application of these building relationships among people to educate was laid out in our textbook in talking about the Practical Farmers of Iowa, the PFI. Our text highlights that the actions of PFI and how they raised environmental awareness in their politically conservative, socially conservative rural communities. When you are talking to people, especially farmers, and we've talked about farmers a little bit already, farmers are incredibly careful people whose actions are shaped by their social structure, just like all of us are, right? And farmers and many other people, if they're not careful, their their whole livelihood can collapse. Farming is a business of incredibly slim profit margins. And as such, if something is viewed as being not practical, they won't do it. And historically, unfortunately, environmentally friendly practices have been seen by farmers as being not quote unquote practical. Additionally, agribusiness corporations play off that carefulness, right? So agribusiness, the Monsantos, the big corn lobby, whatever, they really play up that desire for greater yields, for safety, for keeping any bugs from touching your crop. If you buy this product, you'll be protecting your livelihood, those sorts of ideas. And in doing that, unfortunately, through their marketing, they build trust, is what they do, because they're very slick. And additionally, they give out a lot of free stuff, and free stuff is very, very powerful. This is one example. This is what would be called in anthropology an artifact. There's a free hat you get with purchasing your Roundup. Well, that shows a deep understanding of who farmers are, right? You give a farmer a free hat, and if the hat feels pretty good and it's the color that they like or whatever, that's a piece of and a reminder of this product that will build a positive relationship over time. I'm really as a social scientist very interested in these relationships that we build with objects. And I talked about this in my master's thesis too. If we build a relationship with an object, it can absolutely shape our relationship with an organization, whether that's a labor union or whether that is an agribusiness company. And free stuff is incredibly powerful. So, as laid out in our text, dialogue is absolutely critical for reaching farmers. And we're not teaching farmers, right? Farmers know how to farm, right? Or they wouldn't be doing it. But then also traditionalist farmers tend not to trust scientists, and then elitist scientists tend not to trust farmers. It goes both ways. So if you have a agricultural food scientist going in to start talking to a farmer who has been farming his plot of land for 30 years, they're not going to listen to this asshole from the university. I know what I'm doing, right? So trying to teach them won't get you anywhere. Trying to dialogue with them, have conversations with them, have you teach me, right? Or say, you know what, we need some more information. Can we try something out in this small portion of your field and see what happens? Though that's the form that those conversations need to take. And it was found, as laid out in our text, that careful application of the scientific method can be powerful socially in convincing farmers and other people to be environmentally friendly. So in the case of PFI, scientists worked with the farmers to set up highly observable studies that illustrated to both the scientists and the farmers the importance of environmentally friendly practices, right? So what we have here is a kind of simplified application of it. In this I forgot the word for pot. Okay, in this pot, they have plants growing in organic potting soil. Okay. And then in this pot, we have things growing in quote unquote regular potting soil. that potting soil that would be including chemicals, right? Chemicals that might be good for plants, but might hurt other things. And if you look at those two pots, you're right. They are about the same, right? Thus illustrating that those chemicals are not actually needed, maybe in this instance, right? There might be instances where the fertilizer is necessary, but in this instance, it's not. And it's laid out in our book that PFI and the scientists working with PFI, they agreed. They said, okay, let's grow a couple rows of corn. And on this corn, just to see, which would be a phenomenal, it would be of very little value to the farmer. Farmer's not losing very much at all. We're going to see, is this corn that is drenched with the fertilizer, is it going to be more productive than this corn that is not, right? And this is how we'll find it out. And we will look at it and we will test it. So then at the end of that growing season, if it's found that actually they're about the same, well, that's pretty powerful for the farmer too, because that says to the very practical farmer that, hey, maybe I don't need to buy that product, right? So the farmer thinks, maybe not necessarily, hey, not using that product is bad for the environment. You start to get the farmer thinking, using that product is bad for my profits, right? And that's dialogue. That's working with people at where they are. And then maybe in the long run, they do start to care about things because they see that being environmentally friendly isn't necessarily an attack on their livelihood. So community involvement in research can also be a powerful tool. And in that, it creates new knowledge to what research actually is. So additionally, then, it educates non-scientists in how research works. So what are we saying there? It means that it is one thing to teach a science class to fifth graders or high schoolers, and then after they graduate, they go away and they never think about science again in their lives, right? But if you could show people and talk to people about how knowledge can actually benefit them in their community, then they might actually do the thing and move forward and start doing it better. And then also in that dialogue, the farmer, the whoever may show the scientist something that they didn't know, right? Knowledge is a two-way street, and that partnership is key. So that is really where these models of knowledge come from, effectively. And in doing that, we make our world a better place. I don't know how familiar you are because OSU is such a massive place. OSU has multiple what they call extension programs, and the extension programs reach all over the state. There are multiple contact points within the city itself, and those extension programs are specifically made to share the scientific knowledge or other types of knowledge with the community to try to actually help the community be a better place. It's really pretty cool, powerful learning. And then knowing what caused your result also means that you can explain your results to somebody else, right? So in showing how the scientific process works in a very applied way and in a way that's understandable, in a way that is interesting, in a way that breaks down that division between elite scientist and common person, that builds community, that builds interaction, that builds trustworthiness, that shows that I am someone who is interested in making this area better. I'm not just here to try to boss you around. And I am someone that you want to be in community with. Let me see what's happening here. Okay, I am okay. My voice is kind of giving out. Give me a couple more minutes. I just want to highlight kind of the big the rest of the section, and then we will do the rest next time. Exposure theory really backs up a lot of this idea. Exposure theory talks about if we have interactions with people from a given group, we will be more likely to have positive perceptions of those groups. So if a scientist meets a farmer, they will, and has a relationship with that farmer, they'll be more likely to think good of farmers. And then it goes the other way. If the farmer meets a scientist, they will be more likely to have and know that scientists are cool people too. And this is very similar to concepts relating to exposure theory surrounding race. Exposure theory can lead to what's called phenomenological rupture. Phenomenological rupture is a potentially unpleasant experience that can cause somebody to suddenly doubt the basis of trust upon which they have committed themselves to. So what the heck does that mean? Phenomenological rupture occurs sometimes when people change their religion, or when it could also be when a very traditional farmer starts using organic methods. It's hard for us as humans to change the way we think, because the way we think is typically how we identify ourselves and who we think we are, right? So the idea of breaking out of previous thought ideas is scary, but a lot of times it's very, very important as well. And education is critical then to building basically the future that we need to build to save, not really save the planet. We've gone over, the planet's going to be fine. It's our human society that we're going to be saving. And knowing something does not mean you can do anything about it too. And that's a hard thing about phenomenological rupture as well. You all know how climate change works, but you on an individual level by yourself can't do much. So when people know they're doing something wrong, but they feel they can't do anything about it, that will cause some people to ignore it, right? So if I know I can't do anything about the fact that my boss refuses to recycle, it may be psychologically beneficial for me to just pretend it doesn't exist. I mean, that's the main reason why a lot of people in rural areas don't recycle, because they don't have recycling programs. They can't do anything about it. A lot of that comes down to. And here's kind of the point of this whole bit on education, and then we'll start in on agitation next time. Education can't be indoctrination. It can't be. It can't just be me talking at you for a whole semester. It has to be a two-way exchange of ideas, especially if you're going outside of the classroom, right? You kind of have to listen to me. You have to listen to me to be able to put down on the exam the answers that you know will be right, so that I will click a box and say, yes, this person can pass my class. That's a power disbalance, right? So once you get out of college, you're not going to learn anything new unless you want to, right? Is really what a lot of it comes down to. And that is, that's something else, right? So in order for people to learn, in order to spread this message of things we can do to help our environment, we have to be engaging. It's okay to be challenging. It's okay to say, well, what about this idea? But you don't want to be too abrasive, right? You don't want to be insulting. And often presentation of data that leads to conclusions can be helpful by being very straightforward about it. That can be helpful too. But you don't want to present so much data that the person starts feeling stupid for not understanding what you're talking about too. It's a very, very careful process, educating people outside of the education system itself. If anyone missed it, the code was mug, if I remember correctly. So that is it for our time together today. That's kind of where I'm calling it quits. And hopefully I'll be in class on Thursday. I hope so. And then we will move forward from there. And then we have class again next week as well, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I built some lag time into this course, so don't worry too much about us getting behind. We are actually we're doing pretty well in terms of schedule wise. Okay, we're done for now. I will see you all soon, hopefully, and thanks for logging in.